Jai Guru, everyone.
Jai Guru.
Welcome to Awake Minute by Minute podcast, minute 42. We're now over the halfway stage of our of our project. Well done, guys. How's Christopher?
Yeah, very, very good. I've been enjoying some practice of meditation recently and exhausting myself at the gym, which has been a great re-realization where it's actually really useful for meditation, isn't it?
Yeah, nice. Yeah.
Are
you doing weights?
Yeah, I'm on a whole program.
Can you show us your left bicep?
Show us the guns, man. Show us the guns.
Show us.
I don't want to blow you away with the intensity of it. I'll save you all of it.
How are you doing, Mike?
All good. I was thinking when we said this that we are over half now, we should like play a hooray insert or something like that.
Yeah.
3, 2, 1. Hooray! Hooray! Anyway, minute 42. Minute 42 is about two things. Firstly, the narrator talks about most important is to create a church within yourself, where you are the minister in the temple of your own soul. So this carries on from the previous minute where Yogananda was talking. And then randomly, Andrew Newberg comes back on and he says things about brain scans again, which we won't go into, but he talks about the activity in the brain again, but we'll talk much more about the content of how that is important to our practices. For example, apparently it decreases the sense of yourself, it decreases your sense of orientation of space and time. You block your ability to establish your sense of self as distinguished from the rest of the world. So you feel that connectedness and oneness with everything in the world. So we're going to break all of those down and talk about those very much in reference to Guruji's teachings rather than just what Dr. Newberg is talking about. But if you want to know more about Dr. Newberg, we covered him in sufficient detail in minute 34. So you can refer to that episode. So firstly, let us start with a church within yourself. So I'll repeat, it's quite a beautiful thing. Most important, this is what narrator says, most important is to create a church within yourself where you are the minister in the temple of your own soul. So let's take that line by line. A church within yourself. Michael.
Yeah, I feel like what he means is partially, of course, you create the spiritual environment within yourself, but also some place that you can control within yourself. I feel like when we talk of self, I think this might come later as well. There's two kinds of self, right? There's that self, which is the soul. And then there's that self that is the self identified with the body. And those two are two different things, right? So I feel like when you create a church within yourself, you try to make that self in yourself strong, that is the soul, and that is connected with everybody, and that is not identifying you as one single entity, but connected with all.
Yep. The next line is where you are the minister in the temple of your own soul. So this also, I get tones of introspection there as well. You're ministering the temple of your own soul, Chris.
Yeah, I actually, before we do delve into this one, I did have a comment on the previous line, being looking back in minute 16, when we were talking with Varun Sunny, and we looked at Western philosophers in that minute, and we talked a lot about religion being doomed, Freud asserted at the time. This reminded me of something similar to that. Do we have to have the church within ourselves, and is that the future of spiritual or religious practice? Because we have seen a sharp decrease of church and community around the church. So there's maybe something where my mind goes towards that it's very important that we do establish this, because we have somewhat, moved away from that. Whether it does come back in a different form or not, I'll not assert anything there, but I'm into blockchain technology and crypto and all that good stuff. So whenever I think about it, I think decentralized, decentralized, man. Everything's gone decentralized. and there's something nice to that, where the highest selfishness is for the best good of all, where we can go within ourselves and establish that church within ourselves, and not look for that divinity outside of that. So it just reminded me of these little talking points. And I was speaking to my mom recently about something like this, where my mom was asking, really, in yoga, who do you pray to? Who are you devoting yourself to? And obviously we have maybe different answers for that depending on who you are exactly, but you might pray to your gurus or so on and so forth. But really it's about going within, establishing that within. And I noticed there was a bit of disconnect and really a conversation to try to lay some foundations down about what yoga practice is and meditation is, compared to the more orthodox way of religion, where it's, God is kind of in the church and kind of comes from, the talking from the priest or whoever it might be. And that's kind of the deliverance of God's word and so on. So we have a very different sort of take on it, and it just sparks a lot of conversation whenever you try to get into that subject with somebody who's not necessarily from our practice, and can be kind of difficult to actually explain unless you really think a lot about it.
Interesting you should say the orthodox, orthodox churchianity way of God or whatever, because I think the orthodox way is the way of meditation, and then came the church, and then they try to monopolize God. Not just the church, a lot of temples and other places like that as well. This is where God lives here. This is where you come to pray and experience divinity.
Did India have that in the same way that the West? Europe?
Potentially not before, but certainly since invasions. So, for example, obviously there's been lots of Islamic invasions and Christian, and not invasions, but Christianity entering India. Then there's a bit of retaliation in terms of how we define ourselves, and Hinduism itself is not a word in India. No one says I'm following Hinduism, but because Christians say I'm Christian and Muslims say I'm Muslim, Indians suddenly, or people that follow this path of yoga have to then say, oh, I'm a Hindu. Whereas Hindu, the word Hindu derives from the river Indus, which is a river. So people beyond that river were Hindus. And so it's not really a really good word, is it?
I was speaking to my mum again earlier on about Babaji, trying to explain what or who Babaji is. And she Googled Babaji and came up, I think, on Wikipedia and said that he's Hindu. And I thought to myself, well, yeah, to your point, it's kind of a weird way. It's not the way to think about it, really. And what we, I suppose, do is it's the science of yoga, as Guruji teaches it, that it's all about method and practice and the inner changes that will manifest through the practice, rather than actually being about this external idea. It's a very, very, very different way of thinking about it.
Yeah, Mike?
I love that how you said that the word Hindu, traditionally didn't really exist, and it only became popular as a distinguishing factor from other religions, right? And I feel like this is how it always is. if you just have all the people in a room, essentially they're all brothers, and then you try to start dividing them. You try to find ways to divide them up, and this is where all the problems come from. I mean, not all the problems, but a lot of them. And I feel like the Kali Yuga was like a yuga of division and tribal thinking. And this is like one of the big things that we are trying to figure out right now, how to overcome all this. And there's traditionally so much distrust, like they are not from us, they're there, and you know, and trusting each other and seeing our common humanity. And humanity means that they also have a soul and there's God in them, right? So seeing our connection in God, this is probably one of the things we have to figure out in the years to come.
Well said. And certainly we have to do that. And hopefully watching films like The Awake, The Life of Yogananda will help us more than watching King Kong versus Godzilla, perhaps.
Don't knock it. It's good film.
I've got it on my desktop. Then I watched the trailer and I'm like, why am I even planning to watch this film? Delete. Anyway, let's talk about the next thing now. So Andrew Newberg goes on his lovely rant about brains and different parts of the brain being, you know, decreasing your sense of self and orientation and all that kind of stuff. But first let's talk about what changes in your brain when we meditate or when we have our practices. I'll talk about my experience of that. So the first impact of meditation was how I was able to be much more still and calm in my outward life. Before that, I was a little bit short-tempered before I started, when I was 17 or 18 when I started meditating. Before that, I was a bit short-tempered and I didn't take very well to change and other things like that. So I found that the first manifestation was calmness and a sense of contentment that kind of just dawned upon me, in line with not just meditating, but reading Guruji's words and philosophy and stuff like that. Chris?
Yeah, you said there, you know, what changes in your initial question. And the way that I'm thinking about it is, you know, the subtle grooves in the brain, as Guruji talks about it, it's quite a literal thing, as far as my understanding is the passage of thought and the electrical signals will literally cut grooves in the brain and then makes it very difficult for people to change by the, say, conscious method. But the great thing about yoga is that it does the work for you if you follow the method. You know, these things happen naturally if you do the steps that are kind of set out for you. And the same thing for, you know, all religions, you know, if you really practice what they preach. But thankfully, what we have in yoga and with SRF are step-by-step processes that the changes occur without, you don't have to do anything apart from just, it's quite, I think it was said, you know, in the Gita, is actually very simple. You know, yoga it's actually very simple, but the practice of it, the discipline needed, all these things can be difficult for some people.
What about, tell us about changes that you've experienced.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it, I suppose, happened when I was starting my practice in 2016. It's not all that long ago, and before that I was leading a very different life, you know, for almost 10 years. You know, I was drinking, I was partying, I was going on very different lifestyle, eating meat. And over the course of 2 months, let's say, when I started practicing yoga, I stopped all of that. And I stopped it, one, because I couldn't drink, because I knew I was meditating morning and night. So I stopped drinking, but after a while I had zero urges. And trying to describe that to somebody where, you know, you're the desire for maybe, you know, drink or as a drug, and meat eating falls away. People think it's like a socially engineered change, but actually I would say it's an inner change where there is a more harmonious environment inside, in my mind, in my brain, in my body, maybe in my intestines and everything, through the practice of yoga, that made me not have the outer desire to do the things I was doing before. I can only think of it as more harmonious states. Like you see the practice of water, if you would say something bad to water time and time again, that might change the crystal structure of that water to be disharmonious. And if you say something beautiful to it and loving, it can be very, very, very harmonious looking. You know, the geometric shape of it, it's a lot more sound. And I think that's literally what happened to me in that short amount of time. So I had this mass transformation in a very short amount of time. All my friend groups at that fell away, and there was a whole change in my job situation, things like that. So it was a, you know, destroying of worlds and the building of a new one. But it's very difficult to describe that to somebody who doesn't really come from a place of yoga or spiritual practice, because on the face of it, skepticism really could mean that you judge that in a different way, like the results in a different way. So yeah, I had quite a dramatic change from a prior life to this life, and which I'm extremely grateful for, obviously. But knowing the outcome is quite easy, but not knowing how you get there is very difficult unless you're more educated in the reasons why. So yeah, over time, I suppose I've come to realize more and more, but at the time you just kind of go with the flow.
Yeah, so it sounds like before you were finding your fulfillment in these external things, and then you found out you don't need those external things to be or have the same level, if not more, fulfillment in whichever endeavor that you were seeking at the time. Mike? Yeah, go on.
Sadhguru said it well when he said, whether you're seeking, whether you're in a bar or a temple, you're seeking the same.
Seeking the same.
I love that. I love that.
Nice.
Seeking happiness somehow.
Is that why you started returning to the bar now?
If I go into the bar, I usually get a herbal tea. Yeah. People look at me funny. Yeah.
Mike?
For me, it's a bit more gradual. I cannot say there was like a sudden change, but it's also because I was a devotee for many, many years, and then I became a Kriya Ban. And then once I was a Kriya Ban, it took me a while to get my intensity and my regularity going. And I feel like it was a slow transition. There's definitely that connection between feeling God's love in meditation and looking for pleasure elsewhere. So if the more you feel like you make, you can behold God in meditation as peace, as a, I don't know, feeling of joy, all kinds of meditation experiences that are out there. They kind of give you what you're looking for, and then you stop looking for other things. And that is something that happens very gradually for me. And to the point where I actually need to journal and introspect to actually figure out what kind of changes happened when. And powerful changes did happen. Like when I look at my habits that I had 10 years ago or 5 years ago and now, it's very different, but it's not so immediate that I could say, oh yeah, from one day to the next, this happened and that happened. But I'm very grateful, and I'm feeling, and I'm hopeful that slowly also the karma that I have is like moving in a better direction, and you know that that is kind of the thing when you introspect and you see those changes, it becomes very hopeful and very positive.
Yeah, you were SRF family, but do you remember when you first started meditating? Or you can't even remember? That's how it was ingrained in from birth.
No, I feel like one thing that made a big impact on me was living on my own, because that kind of before, when I lived in the big house, we sometimes meditated together, but I don't think at that point I had any kind of regularity. And when I lived on my own, that was the first time where I at least made an effort to meditate 5 minutes before I go to bed and 5 minutes in the morning. And that was in my student years. And then once I got Kriya, and when you take the vow, then you basically you feel like now you have like an obligation to meditate, and that kind of was a big step for me. And from then on, I feel like there's also always life's experiences that teach you focus more on meditation. And yeah, so I feel like it's a slow increase in my case.
Nice. The next topic related is decrease in a sense of yourself. Again, this is what Andrew Newberg was saying. So decreasing in a sense of yourself. Now I've got some readings for what that means in terms of what Guruji says about that topic or a similar topic. Chris, do you want to read your section out?
Yep. You trust yourself more than you trust God, and yet you know that in the ultimate sense you cannot breathe or walk or move without the direct impelling force of his presence in the brain, in the heart, in the cells of the body. Just because you have become accustomed to dependence on food, air, and sunshine, you think these senses, these externals, support your life. It is a delusion to think so. You are directly dependent on one power, which is God.
And that is from Journey to Self-Realization. So it's a delusion to think that yourself is responsible for much, isn't it?
Yeah, I thought about this quite a bit, and I often wondered that Guruji was really fascinated by the lady whose name, I can't remember, in Eastern Europe, I think Bulgaria was it at the time, who lived off of just sunshine, I think alone.
Teresa Newman, yeah. And he went to visit her, right? And it makes me think that the story behind that was such that it was a very special grant, let's say, and she was taught essentially how to do that, right? But it's not relevant for our time and place, I would say. Like otherwise, maybe Guruji and other saints, like would they have talked about that more, done that, practice it a little bit more? Like Guruji did, enjoys food and things like this. I just wondered. It's obviously not entirely necessary and relevant for us at this point in time, but I know this is metaphorical. Interesting you should raise that, because in the last section of this minute we're going to talk about what Christ said about a similar topic, but I'd definitely say it's relevant. Otherwise it wouldn't still be, or it wouldn't be in the autobiography of a yogi, because it's aged well. The relevance for me is maybe not that we're aspiring to live off the sun alone, the sunshine, but we're aspiring to live less and less on food, in the sense that we want to decrease our diet and our appetite. Like I was just reading, like Guruji says, like you should always leave the table hungry. Like 25% of your stomach shouldn't be full. That space should be reserved. So if you want to work on your prana, there's actually space in your stomach to do that, a practice. So, and certainly in myself, like I used to have three or four meals a day, a very large breakfast, quite a big lunch, and equally big dinner, and all the snacks in between. And now it's very much reduced, and with a bit more discipline, I can reduce it even more. Like for the past few days, I've been on this raw diet. So I do that once a month. So today, all I've had was a few vegetables and few fruits, and then today I'm just gonna have soaked lentils for dinner. So compare that, to live like that back in when I was 17 or 18, I can't even imagine and I wouldn't have been able to do that. I couldn't even imagine it. And now I don't even feel weak. Like yesterday I did that. I was at the gym, did a quite heavy fitness session with the instructor, and I was fine. Last year I did that. I was doing this 40-day thing, which is similar. And I played, and that day I wasn't eating or drinking anything. I was doing something called nirjara. And I do that once a month, where I don't eat or drink any water. And I decided, well, my friend wanted to play tennis, and I said, don't know, would I be able to? It was quite hot as well. It was like 30 degrees. And I thought, yeah, let me try it. So we played a 3-hour game of tennis, and I didn't, nothing. It was fine. And I'm not recommending you try this stuff. You got to do it gradually. Yeah. You've got to gradually work your way up. And I've been fasting for over 15 years now. So don't just jump into the deep end. Mike, go on, Chris.
I'm doing this process at the minute with going to the gym and all the rest of it, and have a diet plan. I would eat maybe 3,000 calories in a day. Sometimes, maybe 2,500 every day at least. My mom was giving off to me she would really say that you shouldn't be eating so much in one sitting, but I would try to eat twice a day and leave the gaps in between. But it's a funny one, because I was thinking, gosh, I wish, Sri Teshwar or Guruji was here, and we could, maybe put more weight on, just with the sheer force of will, as Guruji had, I think, when he visited Sri Teshwar and returned to his house several pounds heavier. That would be great, but maybe not quite there at the moment. And the only way I can think to put on weight is just by eating more. So I've been thinking about this a lot recently, but I don't know if anybody's got any hints or tips to be able to put weight on and work out whilst maintaining this diet. Maybe drink a lot of milk, I suppose, and high calorie diets that don't fill up the gut quite as much. Something like that, I guess. But yeah, it's a conundrum for me at the moment.
Sure. Mike?
Yeah, we're talking about dieting so much, I have to weigh in as well. I feel like the whole thing with fasting is pretty great, because it gives you this feeling of independence. Like you fast for a day, or you fast for 3 days, and you stop feeling that food sustains you, but you start feeling more that something else sustains you, which is great. And also you notice how much of your life actually revolves around food. And then you go like, okay, I want to meet that friend, let's go eat something, but you don't eat. So, okay, let's go meet that friend and just talk. Let's just go for a walk with him or something. Like a lot of social things revolve around food. And once you take this out of the equation, I feel like life changes a lot. So if we were human beings, the same way we are, but we just wouldn't eat, our lives would be very different. I feel like it's this kind of short-term thing that we constantly have to satisfy. Kind of like breathing is more subtle in the background, sunshine. I mean, in England, you don't have sunshine and you still survive somehow, right? But food is like this constant thing. You constantly think about it. What am I going to have for breakfast? What am I having for lunch? And when you take this out, this is like a tremendous force that pulls you into the materialistic plane that you just remove, which I find pretty epic, even if it's just for a day or 3 days.
Mm-hmm. Chris?
Yeah, I love that point, Mike, and it just reminds me of starting to fast myself, and the feeling that you would get was fantastic. Really, not just physically, but as you said, mentally, emotionally, there was a lot of freedom in that. But trying to run the idea past somebody who doesn't really do spiritual practice, to say fasting, it's it's like you've insulted somebody in their member of it's like and they rile at the sheer idea of it. But it really is in a lot of the texts, spiritual texts across the board, isn't it? So Jesus talked a lot about it, and it seems to be the staple across religions, something they can agree on. And but trying to say that to, as you said, Mike, break somebody's social construct of their relation towards food, it's a big deal, and not to be sniffed at. It's something that we should all try to work with each other to get over, of course.
Yeah, Jesus, during Lent we fast, don't we? Let's open card 7 and talk about this in terms of the context of the Bible. So let's talk about this talks about the earthly and spiritual hunger being satisfied forever by partaking in Christ consciousness. Christian, read out your bit, and Mike.
Sure. This is John 6:34 through to 35. Then said they unto him, Lord, evermore give us this bread. And Jesus said unto them, I am the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger, and he that believeth on me shall never thirst.
Mm-hmm. And then the interpretation is the Christ intelligence and the enlightened I am, the divine ego or spiritualized human consciousness in me are one. Thus, the Christ consciousness in me, being the same as the infinite Christ, is the source of life and consciousness of all living beings. Because I am ever consciously attuned to the Christ consciousness manifest in my life, any devotee who comes to me with a receptive attitude and who disciplines his life according to my teachings, so that he permanently connects to his human consciousness with the Christ consciousness, which is present within me and within his own soul, shall find all the hunger and cravings of his earthly and spiritual desires fulfilled forever. Nice.
The devotee who occasionally is in tune with the Christ consciousness and who believes or is convinced of being able to unite with that consciousness and the ever new bliss in it will find that, unlike the ordinary man, he will no longer thirst for the temporary joys of material effects. So
isn't that word occasionally so satisfying?
So this actually, we were meant to read this later, because later on he talks about deep connectedness and the oneness with everything and everyone in the world. But I thought, because we're talking about hunger and how that reduces, fasting and how that reduces our need for food, or feeling of our need for food, is directly related actually to our hunger or our spiritual thirst for Christ consciousness, and both shall be fulfilled if we work on them.
Yeah, I really like that he says, like I just said, he says, if you occasionally in tune with Christ consciousness. So it just means, it reminds me of what Guruji says in the autobiography about Kriya Yoga. Just a little bit of this practice shall save you from great harm.
Yeah,
right.
And that's in the Bhagavad Gita. Yeah, Svalpamapyasya dharmasya trayato mahato bhayat.
Yeah. Sorry, was that Sanskrit?
Yes, it was. Yeah, that's the very famous quote of the "will save you from dire fears." Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's sort of, reading, listening to you guys read that was something then that I can relate to with the story that I was sharing earlier on, that the cravings and hunger really just fell away. And, saying that in the context of, our context makes so much sense to us, but saying that in the context of somebody else, to bridge that gap is something that you kind of have to, see it to believe it kind of thing. You have to do it yourself to sort of fully comprehend it. but certainly it gives hope, doesn't it? But just to your points there with fasting, it does something to me which is allow for the discipline to come in, which helps in my discipline with meditation as well. Just thinking that.
Good stuff. All right, let's go to our fifth card now. So the next thing Andrew Newberg says is there's a decrease in the sense of orientation of time, of space and time. So decrease in a sense of orientation of space and time. That is quite a profound thing. So kind of you can then therefore live in the world, but not be of it, perhaps. Chris, do you want to read your section in that?
The whole world exists only in thought. Such is the power of mind. Space is a mental concept. I can close my eyes and think of things that are 2,000 miles away, and yet all those miles are a mere expansion of thought. Space and time are merely differentiations of thought. What is the difference between ice cream and hot coffee in a dream experience? When you awaken, you realize that in the dreamland, ice cream was one thought, and hot coffee another. They are merely two different ideas.
Thought has omniscient power. The kind of thought I'm speaking of is the thought of God. As He is omnipresent through thought, so are we. Are we not already connecting the thought of America and the thought of India by radio? There is no space there. Interesting.
And we are reading from Man's Eternal Quest by Paramahansa Yogananda. So yeah, that's the decrease in orientation of space and time in various of Master's readings. Chris?
Yeah, it reminds me of a topic we've discussed in a previous minute. I'm just trying to search for it. It was one of the earlier minutes where we had this really nice visual of a human being in sort of the atom form earlier in the documentary, if you remember.
Yeah, I remember that, yeah.
And that was really awesome because what is the human body? It's mostly space, right? And we were talking about this earlier this week, just before the podcast. And I suppose that's what this is for me. What is space and time? Well, it's quite illusionary, and modern science is starting to back this up. So it's all comes together very nicely. But I just thought I'd comment.
Nice. Yeah, that was a good shot in the film, actually. That one where the atoms kind of disperse from the body. Mike?
It's so interesting that what we said in the beginning, that habits, they become they're thoughts in your mind, and then they turn into grooves in your brain.
They're cauterized, yeah.
And then they are there whether you like it or not, right? And when it said like hot coffee here, it reminds me that like since I moved to LA, I noticed a lot of people here drink cold drinks all the time. And I am so used to always having something hot. I always drink a hot tea, a hot whatever, chocolate. And everybody looks at me as like, what is this guy doing? And I'm not even like, when I drink it, it satisfies not an immediate need. It satisfies a habit in me. And I noticed that. And I feel like Guruji had this a few times, right? I think he hated blue cheese, right? And then he started liking it because he wanted to. And there was a drink that he hated, and not that he had once, and then he really loved it. I don't remember.
Yeah, I think it was coffee. Then he was having too many coffees. Yeah.
Yeah, and then he started, and then he had coffee all the time, and then he was like, from one day to the next, I made the decision that I don't like coffee anymore. And then he had one sip and said disgusting and threw it away.
Changed his brain grooves with just a mere thought.
Yeah, and I feel like he showed us that not because it's necessary to hate or love something, but because we should not be controlled by it. And maybe it's good practice to every now and then change up the habits.
I'll remind you of that, Mike, next time you order your Starbucks. Well, it is a very special idea, isn't it? But I love the esoteric way that Yogananda talks. But how modern science, as I mentioned, is actually confirming all of how he talks esoterically, and how this has been talked about for thousands of years, really, in yoga. I just love that idea that it's coming full circle, and they're seeing the unity in everything through science. So,
Mike, can you read your section in 4? This is related to what we're just talking about.
Use your reason, not to become an overstuffed intellect, but to find God, gravitating toward intuitive wisdom gained in meditation and avoiding theoretical knowledge and materialistic rationalizing. Use your devotion, not for worldly attachment to things or people, but for finding God, absorbing yourself in devotion and ecstasy with God, and work not for yourself under any circumstances, but for God and to help others. The culmination of these lies in following the direct highway to God through practicing Kriya Yoga, listening to the cosmic sound of God's voice of Om, quieting the heart and breath, which draw you toward body consciousness, and seeing his great light of omnipresence. And that's from God Talks to Arjuna. No, it's not. It is from self-realization. Sorry. Yeah.
Yes, it is. No, I didn't use God Talks from Arjuna in this. That's pretty much a summary of what Andrew Newberg says. And at the end, he says, he talks briefly about it also blocks your ability to establish yourself as distinguished from the rest of the world. So then you kind of realize that interconnectedness, I suppose, as it was. And he says that in a negative way, doesn't he? Like it blocks your ability to establish your sense of self as distinguished from the rest of the world, which is an interesting way of putting it. You could just say it makes you more connected, feel more one, but he said it in the reverse way. Scientists like to do this. You don't know, use the negative aspect to say something rational in the positive aspect. Mike?
You mean he says the distinguished part in a negative way?
No, yeah.
Well, it's more logical in the context of which they're able to prove that, I suppose.
Yeah. It's objective. Yeah, the objective way they have to do something. Yeah. No, good point.
But it is the one thing that takes us away from God, basically, this distinguishing thought, right? If that one thing wasn't there, if we would know we are God or we're part of God, then I feel like all our sorrows would fall away instantly. So it is so important to keep this mirage of our earthly life working. We need to feel like that we are our body, because in this material plane, our body is not connected to bodies of our other people, right? So I am this person, another person is that person, but behind the scenes, it's more like a puppet show, right? With sock puppets, where God is every single one of them.
I was going to comment essentially the same thing there, Mike, but Sri Yukteswar talked about the individualism. I think it was in the Holy Science book, where he talks about that being essential to life, and you can see it in nature, the individualized form that nature takes in all the different varieties of plants and animals, and they all interact with one another. The bees pollinate, they help pollinate the flowers and so on, and that is essential. And same with human beings. And he said, I think what he said was something paraphrasing like, if we all had the same thought, what would there be to discover or to grow from? As you said, Mike, life would just kind of be done. There would be no discovery process. We wouldn't be able to have conversations and have differentiating opinions and so on. So yeah, an essential part of the illusion.
We wouldn't be able to have podcasts.
Yeah,
everyone already know what everyone else has to say.
Yeah, exactly.
And no one would need to hear. You go, Mike.
Yeah, and there's this this underlying thought that Guruji often mentions, that since God is in everybody, the question shouldn't be, how do I become happy? The question should be, how can the sum of us reach the maximum happiness, right? And so think of everybody, even people you like, people you don't like, people, I don't know, you have a difficult relation with, people who are your best friends. Like, the question is, how can you, what action can you take that everyone will have the maximum outcome at the end? Because it will make your own outcome also increase. It is hard to believe in this if you're trimmed into this kind of materialistic thinking, but it is still true.
There is just to jump on that. I've heard real teachings in terms of business, like that's the way to be successful. You know, if you want to be a billionaire, find a way to help 1 billion people or something. You know, something like that, even in a small way. So even from if you want to think about it from a materialistic perspective, you should follow the same principle. The same principle still applies, whether it's spiritual or materialistic. Try to help others, and they in return will repay you. So it works both ways. Yeah.
But if you want to be a billionaire using media, do not use Spotify, because you'll just be in even if you get 1 billion views, you'll earn negative money. No, just kidding.
Yeah.
We use Anchor and Spotify, so we won't badmouth their business model. But regarding Mike, that concept you just talked about, I remember doing a meditation at the Buddhist Society at my university, and it went something like this. So they got us to meditate with our eyes closed, and then it was like a visualization exercise. So he said, imagine you were meditating with 4 people. The one of the people that you're meditating with is someone who you really like and really love. Yeah, so the person that you most like and most love, imagine he's next to you. On the other side of him is someone, the person that you least get along with in the world. The one, just think of that person who rubs you up the wrong way, or whatever way. And then think of someone that is completely indifferent, that you're indifferent about. So you have no strong feelings this way or the other, but you know them. And then there's a 4th person where you've just seen him, you know nothing about him. And in that in that circle of your meditation, you want to treat everyone in that circle the same, and you want to imagine all of them as the same. And so then what happens is the positivity comes out, and you're just as positive, you're just as loving to the person that you dislike or rubs you up the wrong way, and you're just as indifferent about the person that you love. You don't show them too much affection because you have to be indifferent. So all these positive qualities you can glean from that meditation, and somehow it spills over into your life. And then apparently what they said was, what's really scary is if you practice this regularly enough, what will happen is that person that you dislike or that rubs you the wrong way will start being nice to you for some unexplainable reason, and then they'll suddenly switch to that camp where you really like that person, love that person.
Wouldn't that be so annoying?
Then you're like, damn, I need to pick a new meditation now. There's no one that I don't like or doesn't like me.
I wonder, could you do that for groups of people as well?
What do you mean?
Could you scale it up?
Well, it's hard enough doing 4 people, I think, but you could if you had that capability.
Could you not think of ideas? No.
Go on.
Why would it then be, or or would it be restricted to human beings? What, you know, could you then expand it to non-physical and simple ideas? Because if you think about it, like people get possessed with ideas. So you could then say, okay, well, the ideas are possessing people, and what ideas then manifest in people that you don't like and that you do like and that you're indifferent about, and then you could think about those ideas and then have you know, you're killing many birds with one stone if you could use that term.
With Buddhism. The reason I think the logic for that is it's easily relatable. So an idea or a concept is abstract almost, but someone that you like and love is something that's known and you know the experience very well. Someone that you
in the Dwarpava Yoga. We're moving away from concrete.
Yeah, Buddhists do things in the most simple and logical way, don't they, with their meditation practices.
I've done the same thing. I did it in London years ago, a beginner's course in Buddhism. So I knew exactly what you were talking about.
Did I get anything wrong? I must have got something wrong. I was doing it purely from memory.
No, I mean, probably as vague a memory as you have on it, but no, it sounds about right. Yeah, maybe our listeners know something about it. Maybe they're
one of our listeners inputted some of the proverbs that you previously talked about, Chris. I think, what was it? Before enlightenment, chop.
Yeah.
What was it?
You wash dishes before enlightenment and after, essentially.
Before enlightenment, wash dishes, chop wood. After enlightenment, wash dishes, chop wood.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, something like that.
Awesome.
It's a great one, isn't it? Because
gotta love Buddhism.
You got it's fantastic. Yeah. We'll not go down that rabbit hole. We said it was going to be a relatively short call.
Should be less than an hour, I should hope. But that pretty much summarizes the whole minute, unless anyone has anything else. It's been a good minute, I think. In the next minute, we have Anita Goel, and she talks about physics and physiology, and we'll talk a little bit about that next time. We've also invited Anita to come and talk to us, but she hasn't responded. If you're listening, Anita, please come back to us. We want to do a special episode with you, as we have with all the others. And Professor Andrew Newberg as well. He hasn't responded either. We wanted him as well. Then he could have done our brain scans and compared our threes, Mike. He could have seen how it's changed over the last year of this project.
You can then compare who is the best at meditating.
I want to see Mike's brain waves before, during, and after he's drinking hot coffee.
Yes.
and cold coffee.
Oh no, I think good thing for Mike would be have a cold coffee. What are they called?
Like an iced coffee.
Coffee.
How unsatisfied my brain.
No. Next to have a hot herbal tea that you usually like to have. Next to have water, and you will need to take a sip of all of those and imagine them all to be the same. Yeah. Yes, we're coming up with new techniques as we go along. Good stuff.
Like it.
On that note, thank you very much for listening, and thank you for joining us, Mike and Chris, and we shall see you next time. Jai Guru, everyone. Jai Guru. Jai Ma.